I think what it will do, undoubtedly, is put values like clean, green, healthy, right at the heart of what businesses are looking for in terms of a workplace. So the built environment is a key priority on the road to net zero because it's responsible for such a large proportion of our national carbon emissions. Up to 40% of our national carbon footprint can be attributed to the built environment. It's also responsible for up to 60% of our waste. We spend over 90% of our time indoors, so it has a big impact on our health and well-being. And buildings are also susceptible to extreme changes in weather conditions and climatic events like flooding or overheating. So those are the key reasons really why the built environment is so important. So there's a number of different business benefits to be accrued from addressing the environmental footprint of one's buildings or one's real estate portfolio, not least driving down operational costs from improving the energy efficiency of buildings under occupation, but also significant improvements to the health, well-being and productivity of staff. Really significant links between efficiencies, operational efficiencies and staff well-being. And lastly, I think, with government regulation tightening in this space, businesses can leverage that to negotiate better terms with their landlords and their facilities management contractors and so on. When measuring the carbon emissions of a building, businesses really need to think about three different scopes. Scope 1 emissions are those associated with fuels that are burnt on site. So in buildings, that's typically gas for boilers or for cooking or oil perhaps. Scope 2 emissions are those which are associated with energy that's produced off-site, but like electricity, for example, but bought in, so procured in by the building or by the organisation. And then Scope 3 emissions are those that sit further into the value chain. So this would be anything to do with customers and or suppliers. So, for example, the production of waste within the building, the procurement of goods and services, and so on. So those are the three key considerations when measuring the carbon footprint of buildings. So there are three key areas that organisations should think about when trying to reduce their building's carbon footprint. The first is, and the most important, is improving the energy efficiency of the building and reducing their energy demand. And in offices, for example, that typically requires either an overhaul of systems like heating, ventilation and cooling, and or an upgrade to the lighting system so that they're proper LED lighting, low energy lighting systems, those sorts of things. So that's the first step, really driving down that energy demand. The second step is procuring renewable energy wherever possible. So largely renewable electricity contracts would allow them to do that, but really making sure that the supplier is providing them with genuinely additional renewable energy kilowatt hours rather than just selling them a credit, which may not be genuinely associated with additional renewable energy. And then the third area is if there are any residual emissions left after all of that, offsetting those emissions through a credible scheme would be the next and final step to achieving net zero carbon buildings. At UKGBC, we've got lots of resources available for businesses that are looking to drive down the environmental footprint of their buildings, both new and existing. So definitely worth looking at our website. The other initiative I think is worth considering for any businesses across any sector is signing up to the World Green Building Council Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, which effectively, for businesses large and small across any industry sector, requires them to commit to any buildings that they own or occupy being net zero carbon operationally by 2030. And signing up to that requires them to measure and disclose and report on their emissions, but more importantly, gives them access to a forum of other signatories from whom they can learn, share experiences, share knowledge, and so on. So that's a really helpful resource. And lastly, be demanding. Ask questions of your landlords, of your facilities managers, of your agents. Drive the demand for net zero carbon buildings, and then the building sector really will need to respond to that. In future, I think one of the things that would be really helpful to businesses will be the growing traction of green finance products and loans. Many banks are considering very actively the role that they can play in accelerating the decarbonisation agenda, particularly around real estate. So I think it'd be interesting for businesses that are considering decarbonising their portfolios to talk to their lenders, talk to the banks that they work with, and seek support in their decarbonisation efforts, because I think that's definitely going to be more forthcoming in future. The COVID-19 pandemic has completely changed the way in which we're using buildings, of course, and the one implication of that is we will probably use different building types for different types of activity. So whether we segregate home and office quite as much, or indeed even retail and other types of space will be questionable. I think what it will do undoubtedly is put values like clean, green, healthy right at the heart of what businesses and occupiers and their staff are looking for in terms of a workplace. So I think we'll likely see some of those attributes of buildings become that much more significant and demanding. And then the third point to flag is that as many organisations will continue to enable their staff to work from home for significant chunks of the week or several days a month, some of their carbon footprints within their offices will have been shifted over to their employees' homes. And of course, our homes are our single biggest challenge in the UK in terms of decarbonising our existing buildings. So if that could trigger some kind of realisation and support from employers for their employees to improve the energy efficiency of their homes, that would be a really fantastic outcome.